my sweet summer child, what do you know about fear?
Ah, the long night. I don't think I'll ever forget it. The build-up over nearly a decade. The words of old Nan echoing in our memories.
For the first time, they swept through cities and kingdoms, riding their dead horses, hunting with their packs of pale spiders, big as hounds.
Over the years, the crystallizing of the threat. First it was the Whites, then, with the end of Season 2, the battle at the Fist of the First Men. The first reveal of the White Walkers. Over the next few seasons, Sam would kill a White Walker. The Night King would reveal himself to be the creator of the White Walkers, and then the wildling settlement of Hardhome would be massacred by a surprise attack from the army of the dead. The Night King and his ever-growing legion would slay the Three-Eyed Raven, would recruit one of Daenerys' dragons. They left terrifying, nightmarish markings to warn the world of men what was coming. And then, Season 8, Episode 3 happened. It's been 4 years. 4 fucking years. I'm still not over it. I think the reason I'm not over it is because Episode 3 of Season 8 of Game of Thrones had more potential going in than almost any other television event that I can think of. My heart was racing as the battle began, and even though there were some flights of fancy that didn't quite make sense, some contrivances, some inconsistencies, it was no doubt an epic display of high-stakes, night-bound, zombie-laden carnage. A lot of people might disagree with me, but I loved so much about this episode. The Dothraki charge into darkness during the opening moments made sense to me. Sure, it might be a dreadful military strategy, but it felt in character for an army that had never lost on an open field, and whose weapons had just been lit on fire by a blood witch, to disregard common sense and charge headfirst at an enemy they had never encountered and did not understand. The choice by director Miguel Sapochnik to pull back and show the lights of the Dothraki's swords going out one by one in the distance, with the Dothraki's shocked cries ringing out over the field until there's just darkness. I thought it was genius. But immediately we come to the catastrophic problems this episode faces. This sequence of the lights going out communicates to the viewer that the Dothraki are all dead now, and Miguel Sapochnik even confirms that this is how he shot it. He's quoted as saying in this article from the AV Club, "I wanted to kill everyone. I wanted to kill Jorah in the horse charge at the beginning. I wanted it to be ruthless, so in the first 10 minutes, you could say, all bets are off, anyone could die." But David and Dan didn't want to. There was a lot of back and forth on that. And Sapochnik goes on to say that there comes a point when they dig in and you just don't want to be there. So, it was shot to be a true Game of Thrones-style shocker, dialed up to epic proportions for one of the final battles we would see on the show. But then, less than 2 episodes later, this is totally undermined by the size of Daenerys' unzombified Dothraki army. A large enough army to sack King's Landing with. By the way, while I understood the criticism this episode got for being too dark, I personally never quite agreed. When watched on a big screen with the lights out at night like a good movie or TV show ought to be, this episode comes across to me as a masterpiece of gothic horror, a beautifully rendered clash of elemental forces with incredibly defined stakes, right up until it's not. Everything that made this episode great, that made Game of Thrones great in general, is undermined by the final moments of this episode. The stakes go out the window, and the main driving thrust of the show ends 2 to 3 episodes prematurely, so abruptly that we all got collective whiplash. It left us breathless, but not in a good way. I remember that feeling in the room. I remember a friend saying, "Wait a minute, that's it? That can't be it." And then later in the evening, another friend takes a deep breath and admits to me, "I gotta say, I'm pretty disappointed in The Long Night." We had been fans since the early 2010s. this hurt. I mean, where were the fucking giant ice spiders? Since 2019, as I've rewatched portions of the Game of Thrones run, the first 4 seasons I do find immensely rewatchable, as well as House of the Dragon, which was, in my opinion, an excellent return to form for the televised world of Westeros. I've come to thinking about what could have been. So today I'd like to talk about the long night we got, the long night we were promised, and 5 longer, darker nights that I think did it better. I'm going to call this the Supernatural Night Siege. Or, to be more specific, it's the evil supernatural army attacks Good Guy Castle at night formula. For the purposes of this video, let's call it Defending the Dark Castle. Here are 5 examples that get it right. Number 5. The Battle of Hogwarts, from Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. Much like Episode 3 of Season 8 of Game of Thrones, the 8th Harry Potter film manages to undermine the very thematic core of the entire story in its 3rd act, delivering a climax which is incomprehensible in both its cinematic decisions as well as in its deviations from the book.
Come on, Tom. Let's finish this the way we started. Together.
As per the book, Voldemort is supposed to die a mortal man, his body hitting the floor like any other man's. Instead, in the film, Voldemort evanesces away as a divine being, proving that making all those Horcruxes actually did change his fate, however slightly and however pointlessly. Harry Potter is supposed to verbally dismantle Voldemort in front of a crowd of onlookers, symbolizing Harry's connection to community, friendship, and love, while Voldemort stands alone, despite the number of followers he amasses. Yet here they both stand alone, as though to suggest that Harry is now just as far gone as Voldemort is. At least, that's what it might imply if this whole sequence were not clearly totally shallow, a cop-out of sorts. Don't get me wrong, though. The core of the battle is done well. The dark army of the Death Eaters emerging out of the night, the rousing portrayal of Hogwarts' defense, the swelling soundtrack by Alexandre Desplat, taking us from hopeful and feverish and discordant to tragic, heartbreaking, and monumental, and the battle gives us enough fantasy chaos and carnage to fulfill the fantasy nerd without overdoing it. This isn't Peter Jackson's The Battle of the Five Armies, which, in my opinion, overdid it. Here, in Deathly Hallows Part 2, we've got giant swinging scythes, Dementors swooping, giant spiders swarming over rubble, a werewolf chewing out a student's throat, and the whole thing is, in my opinion, well-paced, hitting its beats with consideration and power, while the plot advances effectively towards the story's conclusion, and then the 3rd act hits and they fumble it, but the bulk of the battle, I think, is done well. It's another example of a movie being so great right up until it's not, except in this case, as opposed to with The Long Night, I think that this film still functions on the whole quite well as the final installment in the Harry Potter series. Number 4. The attack on Castle Kandar from Army of Darkness. I was struck, while watching Sam Raimi's Army of Darkness, by how similar it is in general concept to the 3rd episode of Game of Thrones' 8th season. An army of skeletons attacking a castle full of good guys at night. The difference I found was that Army of Darkness, though on the whole cheaper looking and feeling, is ultimately a richer viewing experience because of its fidelity to its own tone and premise.
All right. Who wants some? Who's next? Huh? How about it? Who wants some?
What can I say? Army of Darkness might not be as cool or creepy as Evil Dead 2, or nearly as scary and groundbreaking as the original, but what it is funny, zany, corny, campy, and ultimately it achieves its own form of epicness. But most importantly, Army of Darkness sticks the landing in a way that puts The Long Night to shame. Plus, I would rank both the official ending and the alternate ending to Army of Darkness as far superior to the conclusion we got for Game of Thrones. Number 3. The Assault on the Precinct, from Assault on Precinct 13. While it might not appear so at first glance, John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13 fits every criteria of a defending the Dark Castle story. The precinct in question is a concrete fortress. The gang attacking the precinct is not overtly depicted as supernatural, but they are portrayed as a silent, ghoulish, and unstoppable force of nature. In a word, zombie-like. And of course, the tale takes place in the dark of night. Assault on Precinct 13 is not the culmination of a decade-long franchise, like The Long Night or Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. This movie is a standalone, and an excellent one at that. It's restrained and rather simple and bare bones by modern standards. Yet still, it's a pretty effective thriller with some truly startling and rousing moments and unexpected turns.
9, Division 13, and take over from Captain Gordon.
While John Carpenter has certainly made bigger, better, and more expansive films, I will always consider this one to be one of his tightest. Number 2, The Battle of Castle Black. From Game of Thrones Season 4, Episode 9, The Watchers on the Wall. In hindsight, this was one of Game of Thrones' best battle-oriented episodes. Not as spectacular, perhaps, as later battles, like the Massacre at Hardhome or the Battle of the Bastards. But this is the battle which I would argue exemplified the best that Game of Thrones has to offer. The spectacle is here, and it is undeniable. The emotion hits hard. Gren and friends standing their ground while a giant charges them is one of the most moving moments of the show's first 4 seasons. Jon Snow losing Ygritte was properly tragic, and while it was heartbreaking, it felt so appropriate for a climactic episode like this one, especially in a 9th episode of a season of Game of Thrones. The stakes are, like in the best of Thrones, gritty and realistic. The Night's Watch is not fighting for the fate of all humankind here, but in a clash of cultures, peoples, and politics. Mance Rayder wants to bring his wildlings south of the Wall. The Night's Watch are sworn to prevent this from happening. No side is completely evil or completely good, though it's not like the majority of the audience has a hard time deciding who to root for. Number 1. The Battle of Helm's Deep, from The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. I don't think many people will disagree with me here. The Battle of Helm's Deep nails it. And where defending the Dark Castle stories are concerned, The Two Towers is truly peerless, exemplary. This is how it's done. There's a reason that Miguel Sapochnik took direct inspiration from this battle when making The Long Night in Season 8 of Game of Thrones. It's a battle with clearly defined and terrifying stakes, stakes that we truly feel. There's excellent geographical exposition, so we know exactly what is happening and where, but also we know just how good or bad each new development is for our heroes. The desperation in the build-up, the terror of the oncoming Uruk-hai army, the impossible odds, King Theoden's doubts. One of my favorite moments in the entire film is his "Where is the horse and the rider" speech, set over the montage of the old men and the children being armed as the Uruk-hai march ever closer.
Like wind in the meadow. The days have gone down in the west, behind the hills, into shadow.
The rain storming down to really highlight the stakes, the dark blue aesthetic punctuated by the golden fires of the enemy's army and the defenders' torches. The larger-than-life moments of heroism, but also the small moments of character.
Well, lad, have a luck you'll live by it. Let's hope it lasts the night.
The ebb and flow of the battle, like a chess match occurring on a grand scale. A victory for the defenders, immediately tempered by a victory for the invaders. A trade-off of successes and failures, culminating in that moment of sunlight-soaked triumph as Gandalf and the Rohirrim charge into the fray. It doesn't get any better than that, in my opinion. when it comes to defending the Dark Castle, Peter Jackson, The Two Towers, Battle of Helm's Deep take the cake. So that's just about all I have for this video. I'd like to conclude with just some ruminating over what it is about this particular type of story that keeps drawing us back to it. Why do we keep telling this one particular kind of story, which basically boils down to a supernatural army invading a castle full of heroic defenders at night? What is it about the night siege? What is it about defending the Dark Castle that keeps on making its way into our largest and grandest stories? I would suggest that it's something primal, even primordial. This feeling that at night, when the world is at its most terrifying and nightmarish. Well, okay, look, the history of the human race is the history of the wolf coming to the door. It's the history of us shoring up our defenses, our homes, our hearths, our castles and fortresses, our cities, our borders, against the unfathomable threats that come at us out of the darkness. The darkness that lurks beyond our fragile, comforting little bubble of daylight. So when those demonic and ghoulish forces come knocking in the dead of night, and we're called upon to defend our homes by the light of our hearths and torches, well, that's the thing, they come at night. So, like, a wolf in the day is a wolf. It's scary, probably dangerous, certainly, but we understand what it is. At night, though, because it's so dark out there, because we can't see, at night, a hungry wolf lurking out there becomes 1,000 other things. Our imaginations run away with it. And we start to see these things that come knocking in the night as truly demonic and ghoulish, instead of just seeming that way because of the darkness. So all in all, I think the Defending the Dark Castle story is, I think it's an instinctive story that we have in our DNA, that all of our ancestors would have had to face down at some point or another in one form or another, you know. It's just that. The wolf is here, the wolf is at the door, and the Dark Castle must be defended. It's in our bones. As humans, I think. And so that's why I think we're continuously, over and over, drawn back to these types of stories that feature, a supernatural army descending upon a castle defended by our heroes in the dead of night, and often in inclement weather. So that's all I have for this video here. Thanks for sticking around if you're still watching. So yeah, this is the first video for this channel. I hope to have more soon, more of this type of video. But let me know. Feel free to leave comments if you have any thoughts that you'd like to share. I would definitely appreciate like a healthy discourse. But yeah, I'm new to this, figuring out the ropes. So yeah, I hope to have some more cool stuff pretty soon in the pipeline. So stay tuned.